C.T. Studd, Cricketer and Pioneer, by Norman P. Grubb. Chapter 15. Through Cannibal Tribes. The parting from his wife seemed even harder this time, but she was now with him in making the sacrifice, although the harder part was to be hers, to remain at home, never knowing from month to month what news she would receive of her husband, separated from her by 7,000 miles. The Lord spoke to her and gave her the victory a few days before he left. That night, before I went to bed, she writes, I had an experience. I sat down by the fire, and as I thought of all that was going to happen to me, I began to weep. I do not often weep, but I wept sore that night. Then I thought, this will never do. I shall be ill tomorrow and unable to help anyone. Going up in the train that day to Waterloo, I had been reading a book in which there were two references. One was Psalm 34 and the other Daniel 3:29. I had decided that in my first spare moments I would read those passages, so I opened my Bible. The first words seemed almost to knock me down. The first was I. I will. It means determination. It means grit, courage. I will bless. I will make the Lord happy, and that was not to be attained by weeping. I will bless the Lord at all times, now. And before I got to the end of that verse, the tears were gone, and I got to that point where I could say, I will make the Lord happy now. Then I read on. I sought the Lord, and he heard me and delivered me from all my fears. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all his troubles. And then the last was most astonishing of all. He keepeth all his bones, not one of them is broken. And coupled with this promise, I was given Daniel 3:29. There is no God that can deliver after this sort. I just felt every fear was gone. All my fears, all my troubles, all that left alone was going to mean all the fears of the malarial fever and the poisoned arrows of the savages. And I went to bed rejoicing. I just laughed, the laugh of faith that night. I rose from my knees and wrote the experience to my husband and posted it to Marseille, though he had not yet left this country. On the eve of their parting, in a flash of inspiration, C.T. put the thought of both their hearts into a sentence, and that sentence became the motto of the crusade. A young fellow sat talking with them and remonstrated with C.T. He said, Is it a fact that at 52 you mean to leave your country, your home, your wife, and your children? What, said C.T., have you been talking of the sacrifice of the Lord Jesus Christ tonight? If Jesus Christ be God and died for me, then no sacrifice can be too great for me to make for him. Again on the platform, just before the train left, he scribbled on a piece of paper 2 lines of impromptu poetry which beautifully revealed the inward motive of their action. Signed and gave it to his friend Captain Downes. Take my life and let it be a hidden cross revealing thee. From board ship he wrote to his wife, February 1st, 1913. Well, my darling, God was good to keep us so busy that last night. He knew I could not stand much, and so he engineered us right through and gave the glory in our souls. I shall ever picture you running up with the camera. I longed, but dare not, say goodbye or kiss again. I dared not. The tears came as I thought of your tears up there, and tears again of joy at the way he comforted you. Now let us thank him in anticipation, not only with our lips, but by our lives. You little dream of how I know that you pay the greatest price. Only I did not dare say so to you. But I do admire you, darling, and shall ever do so. And God will give us his hundredfold. And the result and honor must ever be according to the magnitude of the sacrifice. Don't be anxious. The Lord will be victor, and he will bring us into a wealthy place. I have never felt the power of God more since those Shanghai days. Truly, this has been like the seven going out. Goodbye, my darling Priscilla. We began risking all for God, and we will end as we began, loving each other utterly, and only less than we loved Jesus. In a letter to Dr. Wilkinson, he told of the fire burning within him in characteristic style. The committee I work under is a conveniently small committee, a very wealthy committee, a wonderfully generous committee, and is always sitting in session. The committee of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. We have a multimillionaire to back us up. Out and away the wealthiest person in the world. I have had an interview with him. He gave me a checkbook free and urged me to draw upon him. He assured me his firm clothes the grass of the field, preserves the sparrows, counts the hairs of the children's heads. He said the head of the firm promised to supply all our need and to make sure one of the partners, or rather two, were to go along with each member of our parties and would never leave us or fail us. He even showed me some testimonials from former clients. A tough old chap with a long beard and a hard-bitten face said that on one occasion supplies had arrived and been delivered by black ravens, and on another by a white-winged angel. Another little old man, who seemed scarred and marked all over like a walnut shell, said he had been saved from death times untold, for he had determined to put to proof the assurance that he who would lose his life for the firm's sake should find it. He told stories more wonderful than novels and Arabian Nights, of escapes and hardships, travels and dungeons, and with such a fire in his eye and laugh in his voice, added, "But out of all of them, the partner delivered me." He said gambling for Christ was the best game in the world. He said the compulsory rest cure was rather hard on him, now with his gambling craze still there, but the chief partner commanded it, and said he must not be selfish and greedy about it, that he had had a good long innings and made the highest score so far, and had better sit quiet a bit, with pads off and coat on, and encourage the others. It did me good to see this old warrior. He was like a bit of red-hot quicksilver, and one felt scorched up with shame. And ever since I saw him and heard him, I have had a sort of pocket telephone inside, ringing me up and saying at intervals, "Go it, old chap, go in for a slog. Your eye's in all right, and their bowling is getting weak. Take a long handle, only a few minutes till the stumps are drawn. Go it, go it, go it. Bravo! Now again!" C.T.'s one companion was Alfred B. Buxton, son of his old friend of Cambridge days, Reverend Barclay F. Buxton. Alfred had just taken his degree at Cambridge, but gave up the remainder of his medical course to come straight out with him. Together, they journeyed through Kenya and Uganda to the shores of Lake Albert. "Many were the difficulties and obstacles in our path," writes C.T. "We had not passed this way heretofore. We had no acquaintance with the language of the natives among whom we should be travelling for some months. Whilst as regards French, the language of the Belgian officials, I knew but a little dog and Buxton a little cat French, the small residue we had failed to forget of the meagre stock accumulated at school in days gone by. But we always interviewed officials together, and it was wonderful how often when the dog could not raise a bark, the cat was able to bring out a meow. Many were the lions in the way, all looking exceedingly fierce. However, we remembered that Christian of old encountered lions, but as he dared to proceed in spite of them, he found they were invisibly chained. Some said, "The Belgians will not let you in because you're British." I replied, "That remains to be seen, and I go to prove it." Even the heroic Bishop Tucker gave it as his solemn opinion that we should be unable to successfully run the gauntlet of the many deadly fevers and dangers to which we would be exposed, and would never come out alive. Then we met the lion of fever. My companion was very young, and not over-strong. His 21st birthday had not yet seen the light. Being still in British East Africa, we had not yet approached the real fever zone, but down he went with an obstinate attack that confined him to bed for a week. However, faith in doing the reasonable only is but a bastard. The air is that faith which joyfully attempts the impossible in the will and by the power of God. So we proceeded. At Masindi there was a fire in camp which destroyed one of our tents and other useful things. And also we were met by another lion, a real man-eater this one, who has had many victims in the past. My companion received a cable from relatives who had been assured by another missionary that he was far too young and wholly unsuitable for pioneering in Congo land, dissuading him in the strongest terms from proceeding. The boy had to face perhaps the most difficult and trying question of a lifetime, one which has caused many to turn aside and lose an eternal weight of glory. To such as take counsel with flesh and blood, the question is a holy terror, leading to a wrong and faithless decision. But to the royal Christian, there must be but one answer to the question as to which comes first, the Father in heaven or relations on earth. His decision to proceed was that of a true man of God. God has owned that decision in a very wonderful way. Many others of more mature age have entered the Congo and been victims of fever again and again. But this stripling of faith, during the next 2 years, never had an hour's fever. God has also honored those same relations by allowing them 12 months later to send another cable, this time to express their joy at the decision of a younger brother to come and join us in Congo Belge. A 3 days forest trek from Masindi brought them to the shores of Lake Albert. This morning we arrived at the foot of the hills on the east of Lake Albert and looked across at the hills on the other side, the Belgian Congo, our promised land. Can you imagine our feelings? It was a lovely sight, and there, sure enough, was the pillar of cloud above them. They crossed the lake, and another lion had his mouth shut, for they had a good reception from the Belgian official and were allowed to enter the Congo. That night, their first in Congo territory, they camped on the lake shore. Dark came on, and we had porridge for supper, and a turn around in the bush to try for a buck, as we had precious little food. At dusk the mosquitoes and lake flies were a perfect pest. I slept out in the open with the net, but had to go inside under the tent during the night because of rain. The flies provided a treble to the grunt or barking of crocodiles. The lake was only 20 yards from our tent. I had never thought crocodiles made any noise before. It was not altogether nice to have them so close, and I took the precaution to keep a good fire burning between my bed and the lake. "I know I am God's," he wrote that first day in Belgian Congo. "I know I only want His glory and the salvation of others, and I know He knows it. I never was better nor stronger for years and years, but best of all, I know God is with us. He talks to me, and His blessed word means more than ever before, and hallows me on more and more, and makes me burn to dare and do for Him. Our journey lay through the fierce Belenda tribe, he continued, who had in the end killed Emin Pasha, of whom the surrounding tribes stood in unholy terror. It was difficult to obtain carriers, and the few that came with us only ventured to do so because they would be travelling with white men. A short while before this, a white man had come across from Uganda. He was taken to the chief Julu, who stripped his clothes off, beat him, and sent him back naked and ashamed. A little time after, we had passed through them. An English elephant hunter was shot by a native of this tribe with a poisoned arrow in the shoulder and died. In these regions, Mr. Buxton and I became separated one day from the porters, taking a wrong track. We travelled for over 3 hours up and down exceedingly steep hills with densely peopled villages. Our cycles were mostly encumbrances. We had neither food nor money and no knowledge of the language. Deadbeat and with a terribly clamorous vacuum inside, we found ourselves up against an exceedingly tough proposition. Meeting a man with a basket full of raw maize cobs and sweet potatoes, we commandeered a small supply, but then were faced with the problem of how to pay for them. Necessity is the mother of revelation, and it came with a flash. Why do breeches have so many buttons? To be cut off and used as money in Central Africa, of course. A few sent off our friend as pleased as Punch, though how his wife would stitch them on his tight-fitting black waterproof without causing him considerable pain is an enigma to which we have yet to find a satisfactory solution. At the next village, a little dumb crambo with that rara ve, a man in clothes, had a fire, a cook, and much cheerful company. The cooking was commendably simple and unspoiled by any rich sauces. Having neither saucepan, gridiron, frying pan, nor even a paper bag, our chef pitched the food into the fire and pulled it out, done to a turn, half an hour afterwards. Eating with considerable gusto, we found ourselves with revived strength, plus that comfortable after-dinner feeling which frequenters of the Ritz are said to enjoy. A few more buttons settled the bill. Their filed teeth declared our friends in need to be cannibals, but as both of us were lank, lean, and tough, they were not tempted beyond what they were able to bear, so neither they nor we succumbed. Hence we parted, de gratia, the best of friends, and amidst considerable applause. Kilo is a great gold mining centre, and there we were unavoidably detained for 3 whole months owing to transport difficulties. We became dwellers in tents and followed the simple life. With a tent, a bed, a box, and a basin apiece, what more does anyone desire in the rainy season? While 3 stones in the open air made a range and a kitchen de luxe. You never know how much you can do without till you try. Here I was permitted to sample the African fever so frequently as to know it by heart, but without any increase of affection. It was like being repeatedly ducked by the devil, and once I thought he had ducked me too much. But as each time on coming up, one spluttered, "Sold again, old chap," he finally got so annoyed that he went and sat down in the sulks and let us alone. That big ducking was an ugly affair. The fever mounted, the weakness increased, all the medicines had failed, and the time for disappearing seemed to have arrived. The darkest hour brought a brilliant flash of memory. Is any sick, let him call for the elders of the church, and let them anoint him with oil, etc. Thank God for the saving sense of humour. There was but one elder, and he was in his 20th year. No matter, 1 day is as 1,000 years. But where was the oil? Neither salad, olive, or even linseed oil did we possess. What's the matter with the lamp oil? What, kerosene? Why not? It is oil, and that is all the book says, and we cannot afford to be narrow-minded. The elder brought in the lamp oil, dipped his finger, anointed my forehead, and then knelt down and prayed. How God did it, I don't know, nor do I care, But this I knew next morning, that whereas I was sick, nigh unto death, now I was healed. We can trust him too little, we cannot trust God too much. They received their first mail from England here, and C.T. heard the news that he had become the pioneer grandfather. His first grandchild, Anne, had been born, the child of his daughter Dorothy, who had married Reverend Gilbert A. Barclay. I do thank God for his great goodness, wrote C.T. May God bless them both. I sort of tried to be anxious, but God always gave me peace and assurance about them. From Kilo to Arabi, continued C.T., our track lay in the great Ituri forest, which Stanley passed through, justly famed for its precipitous and slippery paths where the overhanging trees intercept the light of the sun, where you march to the tune of drip, 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 the drips are falling, and where the forest denizens are the invisible pygmies. The forest was very beautiful in places, and sometimes it was like marching through an endless cathedral, the giant trees on either side representing the columns. We hardly saw a soul in the forest, and not a single animal. We could hear the African pheasants calling, but could hardly ever catch sight of them, and never near enough to shoot. Food was scarce, and we lived chiefly on baked bananas and bread and tea. I have marched many tracks in my time, but I've never known one like this. It would have puzzled a goat to have got through. The hills were precipitous, the paths a succession of holes and tree trunks, and all religiously soaped by the devil night and morning to ensure their being slippery. With all our care, and with the aid of long sticks like alpine climbers use, we came down pretty frequently. There was no thinking about it. One's heels were up and one's head down before you knew what had happened. The forest journey was one of 11 days, but we were halted for a fortnight midway in a forest clearing, for our porters refused to go further, and others were not forthcoming. The forest is neither good for fever nor rheumatism, but God saw to both all right as usual. From Arabi to Dungu, the road was better, and we were able to use our cycles a good deal. We had never seen Dungu, but the thought of it was sweet. And there we should rest our weary feet and feel our goal had been reached at last, and there we should begin our work. The disappointment was hidden from our eyes, thank God, and once again we learned that the D-I-S in disappointment is more rightly spelled his, H-I-S. He had prepared a better thing for us. Our rest and headquarters were to be 4 days further west, plumb in the very heart of Africa, as the explorer Dr. George Schweinsworth asserts Niangara to be. After a day at Dungu, waiting for some of our porters, we left for Niangara. 3 days down, the Well River in a canoe landed us there. At Dungu, we had one great joy, that of meeting a real, true, faithful friend, though hitherto we had been perfect strangers, the Count Ferdinand de Grun. Our debts to him were many and very great. If a man is faithful to God, he is bound to lose some friends, but God always raises up others and truer ones to take the vacant places. The Count de Grun was a friend indeed, and a friend in need, not merely in words, but also in deeds. No trouble was too much, no kindness too great for him to do. To him, under God, we owe our concessions at Niangara and Nala, and indeed, through his kind expressions and introduction to others on our behalf, the other 12 concessions also. He died a hero's death at Dungu just 12 months afterwards, hastening to go and fight his country's battles, though weak from a severe and prolonged attack of fever. Even on his deathbed, he did not forget us, but dictated a letter which to me is worth more than its weight in gold. So at last they had gained their heart's desire, and reached Niangara, the very heart of Africa after 9 months' arduous travelling and living mostly in tents, during which, as he said afterwards, we got into so many tight corners but always found God there that we began to look out for, nay, even desire tight corners to get into, that we might see how God would extricate us from them. It was remarkable how God led them on to this place, for it had not been their original plan. They had thought to start work at Faraje, 10 days from Niangara. Then, when the store closed at Dungu, then the closing of that door had forced them on to Niangara. But now, how thankful they were for these disappointments. All around Faraje and Dungu, the country is dreary miles of grassland from 5 to 18 feet high, with scanty population. But after crossing the river at Dungu, the scene changes. Vegetation becomes luxurious, grassland gives place to the giant trees and tangled undergrowth of the tropical forest. Everywhere are little groups of grass-thatched huts surrounded by plantations of bananas and palm trees. They had entered the fringes of the great tropical forest which stretches for hundreds of miles to the south and contains, though unknown to them at the time, the biggest population of the whole of the Congo. Added to this, God had in his own wonderful way given them favor with this Roman Catholic government official of high standing, who not only directed them to all these strategic centers of population in this forest region, but enabled them to get concessions in them. The first stage of this venture of faith had been crowned with success beyond their dreams.